Welcome to GIFT, Growing in Faith Together, an ACYOA podcast put together by the Central Council of the Armenian Church Youth Organization of America. This podcast is here to answer your questions submitted by the young adults of the ACYOA, questions about our faith, God, and being Armenian American Christians. Each episode will be chatting with and learning from clergy from the Armenian Church of the Eastern Diocese of America. I'm Lucien Sabunjan.
And I'm Mardi Kalayjian, and we are the Ministries and Outreach Coordinators of the ACYOA Central Council. We are very excited to host Father Hovnan Demerjian and Father Avedis Kalayjian on today's episode. Father Hovnan is pastor of St. Hagop Armenian Church in Pinellas Park, Florida. Dad, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be on this podcast with you. I really am. Thank you for asking. I've been at St. Hagop, which is in, as you said, Pinellas Park, Florida, for 16 years, like 16 and a half years. So it's been my only parish, and it's been wonderful. It's don't believe what they tell you on the news up north, the alligators, the snakes, the crazy politicians. It's all exaggerated. It's all true, but it's exaggerated. It's wonderful down here. It's sunny all the time. It's warm. It's great. But we have a wonderful parish, and myself and Yediskin Anna, and I have two kids, Narek and Nora. We are blessed to be down here and blessed to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Hovnan. And we also have Father Avedis, who is the pastor of St. Mesrob Armenian Church in Racine, Wisconsin. Yeah, would you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Mardig and Yeditskin, for inviting us to share with you guys. I am the pastor of St. Mesrob Armenian Church in Racine, Wisconsin. I was ordained in 2016 and assigned here, so this is my first and only assignment so far. It's a blessing to be at St. Mesrob. It has a very rich history. We just celebrated last year our centennial, so 100 years of this parish. And Armenians on the Great Lakes in general have a great tradition and great heritage that I think a lot of the diocese is not aware of. So it should be explored as far as I'm concerned. But personally, I am married to Yeditskin Karen, and we have two kids, Aram and Arev. Looking forward to this discussion. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for sharing and taking the time to just be with us to answer these questions from our youth.
So today's episode is going to focus on various aspects of Great Lent, Medzbach. Could you start off by sharing a little bit about what Lent is, especially in the Armenian tradition?
Hovnan.
I can start us off, sure. I'd like to say Lent is a season, and I like to say, it's good to remember that there's a seasonality to all of life, to creation. There's a time for certain things. Certain things happen. God has made the world so that certain things, happen in different seasons, and that we are more healthy when we follow those seasons. And Lent is a season like those, but it's a season that you kind of have to believe in and participate in to benefit from. Unlike the other seasons, which happen whether you're recognizing them or not. And it's a season that if you wish to refocus your energy and your life and your commitment to God first, and put other things behind God, then it's been my experience that you receive great blessings in return. And before handing it off to Avedis, I would say in the Armenian Church, we have Lent like other churches, but fast and season of abstinence are a big part of our church calendar. So you have the big ones before Easter and Christmas, Advent and Lent. That's 100 days almost right there. And then you have a week before other feasts and Wednesdays and Fridays. So, half the year is taken up with this practice of repentance, of refocus on God, and really getting into that, I think, colors your spirituality as an Armenian Christian.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, as Derhad alluded, we do have actually over 140 days of fasting or abstinence in the church. So a lot of people tell me that they're kind of intimidated by the Lenten period, almost as if they think that the church fathers just decided that we're just going to live our lives a certain way all year, and then for 40 days before Easter, we're going to have this extreme change in our diet or in our practices or whatever the case may be. However, they were very thoughtful and clever in preparing the faithful for these long periods of fasting by, as Derhar said, having 2 days of fasting per week. And I think that if we can reconnect to the full tradition of fasting and abstinence, it makes the Lenten period a little bit more accessible, and it makes it a little bit more meaningful, as we have already had practice in doing what we're supposed to do in Lent for, albeit an extended period of time. But we should already be accustomed to the practice and not have to scramble at the last minute on Punparagan time, deciding what we're going to give up and how we're going to commemorate or not commemorate. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for, Dad? How we're going to participate in the Lenten fast. It shouldn't be a last minute decision. It should be something that comes naturally out of what we should have been doing all year.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The emphasis on it should be a continual process. There's a joke about this, but when people all the people that do their New Year's resolutions to, they're going to sign up for the gym, they're going to work out, and then they make a joke, like it's a common meme that like everybody starts kind of falling off after day 15 or 16, and they go back to their regular lifestyle, and it doesn't change. And then next year comes up and they scramble again to put their health in order, but then after 15, 20 days, they fall off again and wane off again. So that continual process. I like you brought that up.
Oh, I was just gonna. Well, no, let's continue the discussion. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, two important things there. For me, the fasting from food is and can be important, but that was not the only thing about fasting, of course. Even from early times in the church, fasting was along with increased prayer and study, as well as increased charity. And then the other thing is that, even with fasting from food, that was about, fasting from other things like not needlessly talking and not coveting things and all of the desires and pruning them back. And so to summarize all that, I love this. There's a German mystical guy named Meister Eckhart, and he says that the soul does not grow by addition, but by subtraction. And, what he's getting at there is, I think, that sort of pruning back and, again, putting away less important things to focus on the most important thing is always a valuable practice in life. And that's, to me, is how I can make it more a part of my everyday life, whereas I probably would have trouble, and I don't, to be honest, fast from animal products every Wednesday and Friday of the year. But I do try to always refocus my attention on God at least that many times in the week. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a great time, especially in preparation for Easter, to just get rid of a lot of the excess things that are taking up our time, or excess food or things like that. So what can you share with us and our listeners about why we fast, or what does it look like to fast kind of in our modern day times if people aren't familiar with the tradition of fasting?
go ahead, Avedis.
Oh, okay. I think one of the most important things to consider when it comes to fasting is, and also following up on what Hovnan just said, fasting is not about stomachs, it's about hearts. And when we fast, when we have that opportunity to deny ourselves, a couple things are happening. Number one, we, through our physical body, make a spiritual statement that we are relying more on God and less on ourselves and our physical sustenance. So that's one important thing that's happening. Another important thing that's happening that one of our church fathers, Hovnan, mentions in his writings is that we become co-sufferers with Christ. Now, we know that through the incarnation, through the Word becoming flesh, we know that Christ came down and he suffered to be co-sufferers with us, right? So he can take on the humanity and go through those experiences as we do. So he's co-suffering with us. We also co-suffer with him through fasting and through denying ourselves. As far as on the biblical side of why specifically, we have to remember that Adam and Eve were the first people who were called to fast. And the first commandment or prohibition, rather, was a fast. And that was to refrain from eating from the tree in the center of the garden. So the fasting goes back, to the very beginning. And there are other parts, like specifically in Leviticus and Isaiah, that talk about fasting. And of course, when it comes to our Lord, Christ himself has assumed that we are fasting. He doesn't, when he says in Matthew, when he talks about fasting, he doesn't say if you fast, he specifically says when you fast. So there is that expectation that Christ has that we participate in the fasting traditions. So these are some of the reasons why we still, participate in fasting up until this day. I did have one more thing to say about how modern fasting is. I have a couple of things about how fasting goes wrong, and it's even evident I mentioned Isaiah. I think in Isaiah 58. And it's evident through what Christ tells us about fasting is that people were boastful in their fasting. Mm-hmm. And not just now, but hundreds of years ago, centuries ago, people have been boastful in their fasting. I think that we tend to see that nowadays. I think there's some competition in fasting, which I understand if that, that can be useful in the sense that it may motivate us to keep a fast if we feel like we're being accountable to one another. But when that turns into a competition of, well, I'm more pious than you are, then we need to be a little bit, careful about that approach. And the last thing I want to say about where fasting goes wrong is when we try to circumvent the eating of animal products by substituting all kinds of modern innovations in the food industry. And sometimes you'll hear someone say, oh yeah, I fasted. Oh, I didn't miss anything at all. Like I didn't miss my favorite foods at all because I had cheese made out of, what do they make cheese out of?
Almond milk and oat milk.
Whatever the alternative, rice, there's rice cheese. There's all kinds of vegan alternatives to what we would normally have in our diet. And even some of the Lenten foods are more lavish than like some of the foods that we would normally eat. For example, well, I don't want to give examples, but if you're circumventing the animal product rule by just ingesting other decadent non-animal product food items, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice and you're kind of just circumventing the rules to suit your own culinary delight, which is not fasting, in my opinion. You may be refraining from animal products, but you're not fasting.
Yeah, it's important to identify that difference. And I guess just for those who don't know, what is the tradition of our church? Is it that you fast for like all the days during Lent, or is it just like from animal products or weekends? I know lots of people tend to have questions about these types of things. And again, it's more of, like you said, the heart than the stomach, but what's the purpose of what our traditions has called us to?
Yeah, I would be interested to hear what Deb Hovnan thinks about this. I mean, we have bishops who disagree on whether, for example, whether or not you should fast on a Sunday because it's the Lord's Day. So leave that aside. Well, what do you think, Deb Hovnan? I think traditionally for most people, they consider the entire Lenten period a fasting period, and they would refrain from all animal products, generally speaking. Now there's a question about whether to fast on Sundays, but
That is the tradition. Absolutely. And then a question of how many people do and are able to follow that tradition is a separate question. That is pretty extreme for many people in the dietary sense. But a few do it.
So is the fasting of Lent at all tied with how we're called to fast before Badarak? And a lot of people kind of hear that we shouldn't eat anything before Badarak. Is that all tied to the reasons why we fast for Lent?
I'm not sure theologically about that. I think that, you're fasting in repentance for confession. And that kind of works, although back in the old days when they confessed on Saturday, I guess that fast continued so that you could feel your repentance before God. So I would say in that way it is.
Okay.
On the other hand, Saturdays are often feast days, so that kind of again gets into some kind of gray area. But yeah, I would say again, echoing the repentance and of confession coming up before communion. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, we will move on to this question is more regarding like almsgiving and service. The question is, many Protestant churches today still hold the 10% tithe, while the Catholic Church does not hold that requirement anymore. So the question is, where does the Armenian Apostolic Church stand on this issue?
I can start with this one. As far as I know, the Armenian Apostolic Church has no official teaching on tithing or giving at all. And like many kind of modern questions and some more applied questions of faith, our church hasn't made statements on that, which is challenging. But the good part of the challenge is that it forces you to go back to primary sources, the scriptures, as well as other traditions, and to see, what that says. And if you look back into the primary sources, you'll find tithing in the Old Testament, a practice of giving 10% of your means back to God. And we still echo that in feasts like the Assumption and the blessing of the grapes has a big echo of that, and readings all about that. So in a way, we're on board for that. But then what happens in the New Testament? It seems that all of the teachings in the New Testament there sort of are no boundaries on giving. Give all of yourself, as Christ gave all of himself. The widow and her giving of her 2 mites was still all she had, not 10% of what she had. So in that way, I suppose you could say that, the Armenian Church doesn't necessarily practice or advise on tithing, but that's not because it's too much. It might be because it's too little. But I also think an important thing to mention is that one of the problems that happens with tithing or any number or set amount to give is that it can become kind of legalistic. And if you give this much, you're in. If you give that much, you're out. If you give this much, you're, pleasing in God's eyes. And if you don't, you're not. And that's always a problem. That is, in my opinion, it's always better to leave that open to God and the giver, but of course encourage that to be as much as possible of time, talent, and treasure. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing I would want to add to that, I think that Hovnan put it quite well. Mardik, you used the word requirement, and I think that's where, when you join that with how we understand in our, modern society, that 10%, it's when you couple that 10% with the word requirement, now in our brains, we're thinking tax. We're thinking that the church is taxing us 10%. because it's required. That's your word. Or whoever asked the question, I should say.
Yeah.
We don't want to look at tithing as a requirement as prescribed by the church as an institution, but we can very much look to the Bible and see what it says about, giving of yourselves and giving the first fruits and giving the best, back to God, and understand that we do so out of recognition of God's gifts. And so tithing becomes not a duty, but a reaction and an expression of thanksgiving back to the Lord. So again, we don't want to put it in legalistic terms like Father Hovnan said. And we don't want to make it sound like a tax. That being said, I think it's clear through scripture that we are to set aside a portion of what we have for, as the Bible puts it, God's work, or the work of God.
The best portion of what we had, really, right?
Yeah, not the leftover,
Yeah.
the best portion. So I think when people kind of internalize that message in their hearts, oh yeah, fasting is not about stomachs, it's about hearts, and tithing is not about calculators, it's also about hearts. So the faithful of the Armenian Church and the young people who may be listening to this podcast should realize that what they give back to the church, or what they give in the service of God's work, because Leviticus doesn't say give it to the temple per se. It says make it, set it aside for God's work. So we want the faithful of the Armenian Church to kind of internalize that message in their heart and and be generous accordingly.
Yeah, that actually ties in really nicely with how the ACYOA has now moved forward to a stewardship model, and how that is within that same heart of having us give out of what we're able to and what we can, and what, like you said, we prioritize to give and not as a leftover, and no set amount per se. And just reminding us to always, give with an open heart. So definitely something that ties to all of our lives outside of Great Lent as well. And then Hovnan mentioned how with serving and giving of our money, it's also a huge aspect of that is giving of our time. We had someone submit a question asking how we can get involved with our churches to serve others, whether that be through, for the elderly, for our church community, or the local communities. Do you guys have any suggestions on ways that our ACYOA youth can help serve others?
I've always been impressed by Dad Avedis's efforts to do this, following in his father's footsteps. I think you guys have always been very charity-minded and serve the community-minded. So now I've put you on the spot. What have you been doing lately, Dad Avedis?
Okay, well, I can't take credit for that, because I walked into a church that already had that community-minded culture already ingrained in it, thanks to Father Ephraim and his predecessors. But thank you for the compliment anyway. So, there are different civic organizations around town that we get involved with, and there's kind of a network of people who help, parishioners who may be shut-ins or who may need more visitation. And one thing that, like I said, my predecessor, Father Ephraim, really stressed, which I didn't have in my parish life or upbringing as much, and my dad was the priest. Father Ephraim would make a concerted effort to bring young people with him to certain visitations. And I think that, for one, that enhances the experience for the parishioner, because they'll see another familiar face besides the priest, but that it also shows that person who's attending what it looks like to minister one-on-one to someone who may be in a difficult situation or have health concerns or is otherwise a shut-in. By the way, if there's a more contemporary word for shut-in, please share it with me because I don't know what.
I know we often have people who are like homebound, but I know there's.
I know, is homebound any better than shut-in? I'm not sure, but okay, we'll say homebound. Yeah, I was familiar with that term, it just slipped my mind. Yeah, so these are the kinds of ways that that people can get involved during the week. One thing that I did want to stress when it comes to doing volunteer work or helping out in the community is that what we're finding is that the agnostics and the atheists and the people of other religions do charity as good or maybe better in some circumstances than your average run-of-the-mill Christian, and that's fine. They can do their they have their service objectives and desires within their own hearts and within, according to their own conscience. But it's important that when Christians do acts of charity, that they understand that what they're doing, maybe, yes, it makes them feel good too. That's fine. You can get joy and satisfaction from doing charitable works, but it's always important to understand that you are fulfilling a commandment of the Lord. You're fulfilling, I hate to use the word duty, so I'm going to do my best to avoid this word, but you are giving back that, out of thanksgiving for what the Lord has provided, you are reaching out to others and spreading that grace and using your gifts to elevate others and help one another. But it's important that you realize that you're doing that in context of your relationship with the Lord. And when the time is right, and I don't mean that you should, force it on the other people who you may be volunteering with, but when you build that relationship with your co-volunteers, it is perfectly okay to let them know that you are doing this as a Christian. So because the love that you express and the sacrifices that you make, to the extent that we can always give that glory back to the Lord, we should always try to do that. And I think we're going to talk about evangelism a little bit later, but that is a soft evangelism that we can do, that when you're volunteering for something, and again, you don't have to make a big, not that you don't have to, you shouldn't make a big show of it or be, haughty about the whole thing. And when your relationships develop with your other co-volunteers, it's perfectly advisable, as far as I'm concerned, is to let them know that your Christian faith is helping you to drive to whatever humanitarian or civic-minded ends that you have and that you can express to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of what you said reminded me of what we actually did at our ACYOA Lenten retreat last year, where the participants of the retreat wrote letters to those in the community who might not be able to come out as often. And I remember when we were planning this event, we were asking like, oh, shouldn't we just have everyone write a letter to someone they know who needs encouragement, because it would mean more to us writing the letter. And I think that was the exact focus, that it wasn't about us, it was about who we were writing a letter to, and the fact that whether or not they knew us, the encouragement that we could provide them was to be our focus for that. So I guess any other service-oriented activities that you encouraged at Hovnan, or that you could suggest?
Yeah, I'll just give you some examples of ones that youth came up with, so maybe that will be encouraging for people who are listening. But blood drives are something we do once or twice a year. Those aren't hard to organize, and they're useful. And so we have them on Palm Sunday and whatnot, and people this bus is parked outside the church, and people generally after communion or whatnot, they start in there and they stay for a couple hours through fellowship. We didn't adopt a mile at the church, so the mile that's in front of the church, we used to clean up all the time. Now we slacked off a little bit on that, but that was a good project for a while. Other programs in the area, but we also did, I think maybe the most powerful one was what Father Avedis was talking about. We do have bringing an outreach ministry where mostly young people, but not everyone was young. They came, anyone from the community to come to do home visits. So a blessing. And then, visiting the homebound, that was the most powerful for some of the reasons that Avedis said. And all those sort of were thought of and run by ACYOA young professionals. So lots to do. I mean, only bounded by our imagination and our time. We always have this thing that because we're an Armenian church, obviously our outreach and ministry is also focused on Armenia. So that's a true boundary or a true limitation, but it obviously shouldn't keep us from serving our own community. So.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Monty, and the St. Sotti's ACYOA or the community in general? Do you guys do any service-oriented things throughout the year or during Lent?
Sure, yeah, definitely. The main one that we did was a Lenten retreat from last year. We had a great turnout, and a lot of people got a lot of good nuggets with them to take back, and motivated them to come to more ACYOA service events, which actually led us to grow into the Feed My Starving Children. We just did one of those recently, had a great turnout. We had our own table, our own theme, and then afterwards we prayed for the food that was going to be sent overseas and for families that need them. So we do a lot of service, not just for our community, but we've been doing a lot outside. We also like to focus on different ages. So we actually had our St. Sotti's ACYOA did do a soccer summer camp for the kids. So it started off with a prayer with Demerjian, and then also we had some Bible study after it. So somebody came and shared their some of the gospel, and it was a good event. So we try to focus a lot on doing stuff for the community outside, but also for our community at the church. So
awesome. And just a quick reminder for those listening, if you have additional questions that you would like our clergy to answer for a future episode, you can submit them in the link in the description for our little podcast questionnaire. And with that, I think Monty has our next question.
Awesome. Thank you. So this question comes from an ACYOA member. Says, as a college student with no Armenian church nearby, are there other acceptable churches I could attend on Sundays instead?
Do you want to take this one, Avedis, for me?
I'll can try to augment anything that you offer on this one.
Oh, that. Well, I think there's an official decision tree of the Armenian churches that you stick to the ones by theology that are closest. So the Oriental Orthodox, then Eastern Orthodox, then Catholic, then Episcopal, and then it gets complicated after that. But that has some merit for me. But I feel like obviously there's as important, maybe even more important factors in a church you should attend while you're in college. So, if there's one church that has welcoming people and a lot of your peers who are serious Christians that you look up to in college, that they go there, that they have a Bible study that is 10 minutes away and you can walk to it, versus a church that has more theological affiliation with ours, but isn't welcoming and doesn't have anyone from your college that goes to it and takes 30 minutes to drive to. We should be practical and smart about the one that we should participate in. And I'm definitely, I would think I'm more sort of open than many Armenian church priests. There's a whole range of like what you would say to answer this questions. But for me, I learned so much. I am so much a product of many different churches in visiting them and how I've been educated. And I just deeply feel that as with church, same with even country, that you sort of you don't have to, but if you leave your church or you leave your country and go to a different one, you end up appreciating the other church, the other country, and understanding and loving your own more by doing that. So, so I say go for it, and that, go where God leads you and where you can have a regular practice and faith experience that is edifying. So
yeah, I would just add to that I think it's kind of dependent a little bit on the individual, and I wouldn't want to make too many hard and fast rules about what any specific individual should do. But I would say that if you're Armenian, if you identify yourself as an Armenian Christian based on your baptism and you've been to church a couple times between 0 and 18, years of age and you've been to a couple weddings maybe, or your cousin's baptism, and that's about it. For that type of college student, I would be hesitant to send them just to any church because they may not have the tools to differentiate good theology from bad theology. If, however, you consider yourself a more mature Christian, maybe went through the Sunday school program or maybe self-educated, more aware of the nuances, then for that person, I feel more comfortable advising that they go to, a church that they, for whatever logistical reasons or whatever, find to be appropriate for them. That person, to me, will have a better chance taking something positive out of their experience and leaving what they need to leave, at the church door. So not every church teaches the same thing. I know that there can be a temptation to say that not only all churches, but some people might argue that all religions teach the same thing. Let's love one another and get along and recognize that God exists. Well, in that type of reduction, I can reduce anything to anything else, basically. If you want to take that kind of simplistic, attitude towards comparing two very different things. So I think it really depends on the individual, but whoever is listening, you should know that bad theology exists. And when you're exposed to it, it would be nice to know how to differentiate before you get too deep into one direction or another.
And for those who might not know, could you share a little bit about like the churches that the Armenian church is in like communion with? Because I know there are a few different types of Orthodox Christians that we are in communion with, I guess is how we often say it.
Yeah, so the ones that we are in immediate communion with or full communion with are the Coptic, the Assyrian, the Indian, the Ethiopian, and I guess now since the Ethiopians and the Eritreans have split, I think. Am I right in that, Deadhide?
I don't know what the formality of it is. I know the situation, but I don't know who's in communion with you at this point.
So growing up, we would just say Ethiopian, but now I think we have to add Eritrean because of the political situation between those two nations. So then branching out from that, then you have the rest of the Eastern Orthodox Church is Deadhide alluded to. That would be like the Ukrainian and the Russian and the Greek Orthodox churches, Serbian Orthodox, and then from there the different Catholic rites.
Cool, thank you. I know there's so many different churches out there, and for a lot of us, we just know we're Armenian or Orthodox, and kind of getting a little bit of that context can be helpful for us.
And then if I could just add one thing about like one of the biggest differences, especially for like the Sunday service, is how the individual churches understand communion. And so I don't want to get into the nuances about all the differences, but there is a significant difference between how, let's say, the Lutherans and the Armenian Orthodox, or maybe your non-affiliated, non-denominational Protestant church who may do communion once a year or once a month. Aside from the frequency and how it's distributed and what the elements are, whether it be grape juice or wafers or pieces of bread or leavened or unleavened or whatever, aside from the mechanics of the whole thing, there are theological differences in how different churches understand what is happening when communion is being distributed. So that's another thing to be sensitive to. So that's why when push comes to shove, I would advise people to get as close to Oriental Eastern Orthodoxy as possible, especially on a sacramental level, if they're going to participate in the communion.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure for those who might have more questions, like definitely chat with your Deadhides or your High Stewardess, whoever in your community, and maybe we'll dive into this a little bit more on a future episode too. Okay, so our next question is, how does the Armenian Church practice evangelism? And for those who might not know, what is evangelism?
I'll go. Avedis, if I may. Evangelism is in the old sense, our church and every church has practiced evangelism, meaning sharing the gospel with others. And we should do that a lot. But evangelism as a word in modern culture in America, especially, it's a specific way of sharing the gospel, which is mostly done by, lower Protestant churches, which has a lot to do with, I think, convincing people, usually by word, everywhere and anywhere, of the rightness of Christian faith. And I think that's okay. I think there's things to learn from that. But the Orthodox, the Armenian Orthodox way is different of doing evangelization. And I think our way is much more, it's liturgical, it's scriptural, it's experiential, probably most of all, that you would want to seriously follow Christ for many years, and then you would have something to give to someone else. You would have an example to show. You would have a lived example of a follower of Christ that would then be shared easily with someone else. And I think I believe in that. I believe in that little statement that someone said, that faith is caught and not taught, or it's definitely more caught than taught. That I don't think it works very well to just try to convince people of your faith, as much as it is just to try to, over a long period of time, after building trust by your own example, if you have one of following Christ, then others will see that and follow. So that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. For the Armenians, having been a nation that's been dominated by neighbors and other hostile ideologies and contradictory religious traditions, whether it be Islam or communism and with that atheism, having been under that kind of situation for so many centuries, to the extent that Armenians were not even really allowed to share their faith outside of their community. I feel like we've lost the practice of evangelism. We've lost the vocabulary. We've lost the drive. We've lost the confidence. I think that's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to work to get some of that back. And I agree with Father Hovnan. We cannot just take the Protestant model and just plop it down into Orthodoxy. That's not our way. So there's a lot of work to be done along these roads. Now, some people consider getting involved in ecumenical activities as that's the Armenian churches as an institution. That's our expression of evangelism. I'm not convinced of that. That might be a baby step in that direction, perhaps, but I don't see the rank and file Armenian Christian as someone who's willing to have difficult conversations with friends and family and have the vocabulary to express their faith clearly and articulately as much as maybe we should at this point, having been in this country for so many years, not under the yoke of any specific, dominating circumstances with respect to sharing religion. So we have a lot of work to do, is how I can put it. And just copying what the non-denominational evangelical churches are doing, I don't think is going to fit for how we understand our faith and how it's spread historically.
Great, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And just the quick question, do you have any final tips to share with our listeners to make this Lent more meaningful this year?
For me, it's just intentionality of it. I just, like many other things in life, what you put into it is what you get out of it. So if you if you want to be strong, you go to the gym, and it's not fun a lot of times, but it is when you're done, and it definitely is after you've been there a bunch of times. And I think that Lent is like that too, even for priests, or just speaking for myself. 16 times of going around, you can also get weary, or it can get you can lose some of the original purpose and drive that you had. But if you do it, I have never been. I've always been surprised of what God has in store for me in Lent when I put my heart into it, and I never do it perfectly. And I miss whole weeks or something like that, or I start 10 days after I'm supposed to start, but eventually get with the program, and God works good things in my life and in others too.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we're purposeful about it and have realistic expectations, especially if you're not used to fasting, as we mentioned before, the church calendar is set up to prepare you, twice a week. And other stretches of fasting during the year to prepare you for the long haul of the 40 days. But aside from the actual mechanics of it, and what am I going to give up this year, and is this an animal product, or does this contain an animal product, or doesn't it? I think if we're focused on the opportunity that the church gives us to kind of recenter and refocus, I think. With that as our goal, people can have a very fruitful and reflective and inspirational Lenten experience.
Our last question is, where can our listeners hear more from you or get other sources of encouragement throughout the week?
So I actually have a podcast, or all of the sermons, which I always do them in English, about 8 minutes. Those are on YouTube and most anywhere you get podcasts. And if you just look up St. Hagop Armenian Church, I think it's called St. Hagop Armenian Church Sermons, you'll find that there. You can ask your smart speakers and stuff, but you have to speak like an American robot. So like St. Hagop Armenian Church or whatever it is, and you'll find it there. So I hope that could help you on your Lenten journey.
Yeah, so last year, I started this service, I guess if you want to call it that, where it's an automated service. It's free of charge, where you will receive as a text message a prayer less than 160 characters, a short prayer in English from the Armenian tradition. And usually it comes from either St. Gregory of Nadeg or St. Nessa Shunerhali or one of the other church fathers that we have, or it comes from snippets from the hymnal, the Shadag notes. So a lot of people have found this to be valuable, to have that little prayer that they can read off their phone every day. And the way to subscribe, like I said, it's free, and you can stop it at any time. If you text the keyword prayer to 888-610-5322, 888-610-5322. You text the keyword prayer, then you can subscribe to this service. So it's another way to kind of, make the Lenten period a little bit more meaningful, but it runs all year.
Awesome. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you, guys. It's amazing. We thank you both for the time you took to sit down with us on this podcast episode and answer these questions sent in by our youth, and just spreading the knowledge that we can take and use in our lives.
Mardig and I also want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. These podcasts are designed for anyone to listen in, to learn, and be a part of the ministries of the ACYOA Central Council. We hope you learned something new when it comes to fasting, serving in your communities, and sharing Christ's love with all those around you this Lenten season. As a reminder, more questions for future episodes. We would love to get them from you on the questionnaire in the description, and hope to catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. God bless your ministry.